The verse of the day is John 8:7. And it says, "They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, 'All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone.'" The title of today's portion of scripture is called "A Woman Caught in Adultery," and it's a very famous story that explains that we're all sinners, that we are all on equal playing fields, that no one is seen as better in God's eyes because we all fall short. We all are considered sinners. To paint the scene a little bit, Jesus is speaking to a crowd of religious leaders. And in the midst of that, some Pharisees bring in a woman and they say, "Teacher, we caught this woman in the act of adultery. The law says to stone her. What do you say?" And they're trying to actually trick him into saying something that's wrong. So he actually pauses and he doesn't say anything. And he's just like writes in the sand, which I think is kind of funny because he's not quick to defend himself. He just is silent. And they ask again because they're persistent in wanting to know. And then Jesus responds with today's verse saying, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." And after Jesus says that, everyone slowly trickles away. And in verse 10 it says, "Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, 'Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?' Verse 11 says, 'No, Lord,' she said. And Jesus said, 'Neither do I. Go and sin no more.'" Now, I think this could be a difficult pill to swallow if you are someone who's experienced cheating or your family falling apart or a sin that causes mass destruction in your life. And it's easy to be like, well, I'm not functioning like that. I'm not causing destruction like that. Why do they get to go free? Why do they just get a get out of jail free card? And I think it's important to know that God's grace doesn't come without consequences. So if we are actively falling into sin and we are choosing certain things, there's going to be consequences to those actions. That doesn't mean you don't get forgiveness. You do get forgiveness. God gives never-ending forgiveness and grace. But the things we do in our life come with consequences. So you might get forgiveness, but still have to walk out the consequences of what you have done or what you've fallen into, or going into a process of really having to heal, or going into a process of really having to break off certain things and change your perspective and change your habits, because forgiveness can come in a moment, but you have to then choose to walk out the life of grace you have available to you. And I love how in the end of the story it says, "Go and sin no more." So God doesn't condemn her for her sin and then says, "Go and sin no more." So it's with God's grace and his forgiveness that we are given an action to go and sin no more, to no longer do the thing that we were doing. And that's how we're going to step into grace. That's how we're going to step into more and more freedom and relationship and connection with God if we go and try to sin no more, which we all fall short. We're never going to be without sin. That's just the reality of the world we live in and having a sinful human nature. But the good news is you can progress and become better at resisting temptation, resisting the sin. So you might have moments of lashing out in anger or having unforgiveness or being judgmental, but it's what you do with what you're aware of. So if you're aware of a judgmental heart posture that you have, it's going to God with it and saying, "Lord, I feel judgmental and I don't want to feel this way. Lord, renew my mind, help my perspective to be in alignment with yours. Trade out my thoughts for yours. Help me to see the people in my life or the people in my proximity through your lens. Help me to not judge. Help me to have love for everyone." And that's how you go after being refined and choosing love and unconditional love and not throwing stones. I think there's two things that are really important to know when it comes to judging people for their sin or feeling an urge to throw the first stone is all of us were raised differently. All of us have different pasts, childhoods, generational things. We've all come from different families that have different struggles and different levels of struggle based off of generational relationships with God, even because when you prioritize relationship with God, things get passed down generationally. When you struggle with sin, things get passed down generationally. So this is why breaking generational curses is so important, because you're ending it. You're ending whatever cycle has been passed down. And so when it comes to looking at people and saying, how could they do that? I could not. I just don't understand. For one, there's going to be a lot of things we don't understand, and it's not for us to understand. It's for us to just give to God and stay in our lane and remember that you were given unconditional love, and you're given grace every day when you have moments of sin or when you fall short. When you get into the specifics of measuring sin, it's a slippery slope, because you can easily fall into comparison and judgment and wanting to condemn certain people. And then you forget that you've also received a ton of grace. And I think when you're on a journey of walking with God and you're seeing freedom and transformation, and you're really going after looking like the heart of God, you're going to start to see parts of you look like him. So it's easy to be like, well, I'm progressing and becoming better and getting all this freedom. Why can't they? But there's so much we don't know behind the scenes, and things we don't need to know. Letting God be God is the key, because when you want to judge or see people in a certain lens of, oh, they deserve this punishment, you're playing God. So you're deciding to stand in the God role, which means you probably deserved a certain punishment at some phase in your life that you're not allowing them to have freedom from. Today's verse reminds me of that scripture that says, we're not fighting against flesh and blood. We're fighting against principalities, darkness, strongholds, spiritual things. And those are going to be things that we don't see and we won't fully understand. But when we keep that in our perspective, that the things people are led to do, there is a deeper thing driving them to do it. There is pain and heartache and lies driving people to act in certain ways, which is why they need unconditional love. Unconditional love is the antidote to all of it. And so when we act as vessels of unconditional love, we give God an opportunity to heal and restore hearts through us. Most often when we fall into sin, it's because we're trying to meet a need that God can meet for us. So this woman in the story, when people fall into adultery, most often they're trying to meet a need of love in their heart and in their soul, and they're doing it in their own strength instead of with God. So this is why it's detrimental, because you're actually causing more heartbreak and withholding more and more love through the actions that you're doing to gain love, where God can actually meet that need, just you and him, in a way where you can maintain love and give more love. The story can have so many lessons, but two things I think it's really highlighting is the sinner. You aren't condemned if you've fallen into any sort of thing that you think is unforgivable. There is forgiveness there. You just have to turn from it and follow Jesus and allow him to help you turn from it. And then I think it's also speaking to those who want to throw the stone and want to say, well, you shouldn't be acting that way. Giving unconditional love, speaking the truth. Speaking the truth in love is what's going to help us stay in our lane and represent God well. Okay?